Every kitchen in the world has a bottle of cooking oil sitting next to the stove, and most people grab whichever one is cheapest without a second thought. But every oil behaves differently the moment it hits a hot pan. Some break down and release acrid, toxic smoke at temperatures you reach every time you fry an egg. Others handle serious heat without flinching, and the one in your cupboard labeled vegetable oil almost certainly contains no vegetables at all. Some of these oils have histories stretching back thousands of years. Others were invented in a laboratory barely 50 years ago. Here is every cooking oil explained. Olive oil. The olive tree was one of the first trees humans ever domesticated, roughly 6,000 years ago, in what is now Turkey and Syria. Clay tablets from around 2400 BCE describe large-scale olive oil production in the city of Ebla, and by the height of the Roman Empire, olive oil was so central to daily life that the poet Homer called it liquid gold. The basic process has barely changed since. Crush the fruit, press the pulp, and the oil separates from the water. What has changed is the labeling. Extra virgin is mechanically extracted without heat or chemicals and must meet strict acidity standards. Regular olive oil is refined to strip away flavor, color, and impurities. And the label that says light olive oil has nothing to do with calories. It just means the oil has been refined until almost no olive flavor remains, giving it a higher smoke point around 470 degrees compared to extra virgin at roughly 350 to 410. Here is the part that catches people off guard. Olive oil is one of the most fraudulently marketed foods in the world. Independent investigations have repeatedly found bottles labeled extra virgin that were cut with cheaper soybean or sunflower oil, sometimes dyed with chlorophyll to look the right shade of green. Italian authorities have seized tens of thousands of liters of counterfeit oil in single raids. The most reliable way to check at home is taste. Real extra virgin has a peppery bite at the back of the throat. If it goes down smooth and bland, it probably is not what the bottle claims. Olive oil is pressed from fruit, and its story spans 6,000 years. But the next oil has been pressed from seeds for nearly as long, and in parts of Japan, it was once considered too precious to cook with: sesame oil. Sesame is one of the oldest oilseed crops ever cultivated, with records of use stretching back thousands of years across India and the Middle East. It was valued not just for cooking, but for medicine, ritual, and lighting. In Japan, sesame oil was so expensive for centuries that it was reserved almost exclusively for burning in Buddhist temple lamps. Only when cheaper rapeseed oil took over the lamp market during the Edo period in the 1600s did sesame oil become widely available as cooking oil, and that shift is the reason tempura exists in the form we know it today. What makes sesame oil unusual is that the same seed produces two completely different oils depending on whether it is toasted first. Untoasted sesame oil is pale, mild, and has a relatively high smoke point, suitable for stir-frying and sautéing. Toasted sesame oil is pressed from roasted seeds and turns a deep amber color with an intense, nutty aroma that fills the entire kitchen. It has a much lower smoke point and is almost never used for cooking over heat. Instead, it gets drizzled at the very end over a steaming bowl of ramen or stirred into a dressing. A few drops can transform an entire dish. The regional differences are worth knowing too. Chinese cooking treats toasted sesame oil as a seasoning, added by the teaspoon for fragrance. Korean sesame oil tends to be roasted at higher temperatures for a deeper, smokier flavor, and is used more generously as both a cooking and finishing oil. Sesame oil was sacred enough to light temples, but the next cooking fat takes that sacred status even further: ghee. In India's hot climate, fresh butter spoiled within hours. So thousands of years ago, cooks discovered that if you simmered butter long enough over low heat, the water would evaporate and the milk solids would separate and sink to the bottom. Strain those solids out, and what remains is pure golden butter fat that can sit on a shelf for months without refrigeration. That is ghee. The word comes from the Sanskrit grita, meaning to sprinkle, and ghee has been central to Indian life for millennia. It is sacred in Hinduism. Vedic texts describe a creation deity producing the first ghee by rubbing his hands together. Ayurvedic medicine considers it one of the most nourishing substances a person can consume, and in traditional Indian cooking, tempering whole spices like cumin, mustard seeds, and curry leaves in sizzling hot ghee is the opening move of countless dishes, releasing their essential oils into the fat before anything else hits the pan. Ghee is also a genuinely better cooking fat than regular butter in several practical ways. Removing the water and milk solids pushes the smoke point from butter's roughly 300 degrees Fahrenheit up to around 450, which means ghee can handle serious frying heat without burning. It is also nearly free of lactose and casein, so many people who cannot tolerate dairy can use ghee without issues. The difference between ghee and plain clarified butter is subtle but real. In clarified butter, the milk solids are removed as soon as they separate. In ghee, those solids are allowed to lightly brown before straining, which gives ghee a richer, nuttier depth. Ghee was invented to survive extreme heat, but the next oil comes from a place where heat was never in short supply: coconut oil. For thousands of years across Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands, coconut oil was just cooking oil. Nothing exotic about it. Families in coastal villages grated fresh coconut meat, pressed the white flesh, and used the oil for frying fish, moisturizing skin, and everything in between. Then the Western wellness industry discovered it around 2010, and things got complicated fast. Coconut oil is roughly 82% saturated fat, which is actually higher than butter. For decades, that fact alone made nutritionists wary. Then suddenly it was everywhere, labeled a superfood, credited with boosting metabolism and improving brain function. Sales surged. Then, in 2017, the American Heart Association issued an advisory that specifically warned against coconut oil, citing evidence that it raises LDL cholesterol. The following year, a Harvard professor called it pure poison in a university lecture that racked up over 1 million views on YouTube. The reality sits somewhere in the middle. Coconut oil is not poison, and it is not a miracle cure. It contains a high proportion of lauric acid, a medium-chain fatty acid, that behaves somewhat differently in the body. But the science does not support the superfood label either. What matters for cooking is the difference between refined and virgin. Refined coconut oil is made from dried coconut meat called copra, processed with heat and bleaching clay, and has no coconut flavor at all. Virgin is pressed from fresh meat and retains the tropical aroma. Refined handles higher heat, around 400 to 450 degrees. Virgin belongs in dishes where you want that coconut flavor to come through. Coconut oil spent a decade caught between superfood and poison. The next oil never needed the publicity. Peanut oil. Peanuts are not actually nuts. They are legumes, more closely related to lentils and chickpeas than to almonds or cashews. And despite their name, they do not grow on trees or bushes. A peanut plant flowers above the soil, but after pollination, the flower stalk bends downward and pushes itself into the earth, where the peanut develops underground in a small chamber. The botanical name, Arachis hypogea, literally translates to underground chamber. Peanuts are native to South America, most likely modern-day Bolivia. Portuguese traders carried them to West Africa during the 1500s, where they became a dietary staple almost immediately. Groundnut stew, known across the region as ma'afe, uses peanut paste as the base of the dish and remains one of the most widely eaten meals in West Africa today. As a cooking oil, peanut oil is something close to ideal for deep frying. Refined peanut oil has a smoke point around 450 degrees Fahrenheit. It stays remarkably stable through extended periods of high heat, and it has a neutral flavor that does not transfer between batches. You can fry fish and then fry donuts in the same pot of peanut oil, and the donuts will not taste like fish. That stability is exactly why peanut oil is the go-to choice for deep frying whole turkeys at Thanksgiving across the American South, a process that takes 45 minutes or more of continuous heat. Refined peanut oil also has most allergenic proteins removed during processing, which is why many people with peanut allergies can safely consume it. But the cold-pressed, unrefined version still contains those proteins and should be avoided by anyone with an allergy. Peanut oil does its best work at high temperatures, but the next oil owes its popularity to something far stranger than chemistry. If you are finding this useful, hit subscribe. I cover the stories behind everyday foods every week. Now, back to the oils. Sunflower oil. The sunflower is one of very few major crop plants that originated in North America. Native Americans domesticated it around 1,000 years before the Common Era, long before Europeans ever set foot on the continent. Spanish explorers carried sunflower seeds back to Europe in the early 1500s, where the plant spent 2 centuries as little more than a garden decoration. Then it reached Russia, and everything changed. The reason sunflower oil became enormous in Russia has almost nothing to do with agriculture or taste. The Russian Orthodox Church maintained a strict list of foods forbidden during the weeks of Lent, and that list included butter, lard, and nearly every cooking fat available at the time. But sunflower oil was so new to the region that nobody had thought to add it to the banned list. Russian families embraced it as their Lenten cooking fat, and demand exploded. By the mid-1800s, Russian breeders were selectively developing sunflower varieties specifically for higher oil content, pushing the yield from around 28% up to nearly 50% per seed. In 1978, a Soviet researcher created a mutant variety with extremely high oleic acid, which resists going rancid without any need for hydrogenation. The snack food industry adopted it almost immediately because it meant frying oil that stayed fresh far longer and produced zero trans fats. Today, Russia and Ukraine together produce over half the world's sunflower oil, which is why the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine sent sunflower oil prices surging across the globe within weeks. The ripple effects reached supermarket shelves from London to Lagos. A cooking oil that exists partly because of a religious calendar now moves global commodity markets. Sunflower oil started as a loophole, but the next oil started as something genuinely dangerous: canola oil. Before canola existed, there was rapeseed, and rapeseed oil was not something you wanted anywhere near your food. It contained high levels of erucic acid, a compound linked to heart damage in animal studies, along with bitter-tasting glucosinolates that made the oil unpleasant to eat. During the Second World War, rapeseed oil was used primarily as a machinery lubricant for naval vessels, not as a cooking ingredient. After the war, Canadian plant scientists set out to breed a version of rapeseed that would be safe enough to eat. Through over a decade of conventional crossbreeding, researchers Balder Stephenson and Keith Downey produced the first low-erucic, low-glucosinolate rapeseed variety in 1974. The plant worked, but the name did not. Nobody was going to buy cooking oil with the word rape on the label. The solution was canola, a word invented by combining Canadian and ola, a suffix meaning oil. It received official safe-for-consumption status in the United States in 1985. While we are on the subject of names, here is something worth knowing. The bottle in your cupboard labeled vegetable oil almost certainly contains no vegetables. In the United States, roughly 85% of what is sold under the vegetable oil label is pure soybean oil. The remainder is usually a blend of soy with corn, canola, or sunflower oil. The manufacturing process for most of these seed oils uses a chemical solvent called hexane, which dissolves the oil out of crushed seeds before being evaporated off. What remains is a flavorless, odorless, nearly colorless liquid designed to disappear into whatever you cook with it. Canola was engineered to be safe, but the next oil was supposed to be premium, and it turns out almost nobody is selling the real thing: avocado oil. Unlike olive oil with its 6,000-year history, edible avocado oil was nothing more than an idea barely 3 decades ago. The modern industry was pioneered in New Zealand in the late 1990s, making it one of the youngest cooking oils in widespread use. It is pressed from the green fatty pulp surrounding the pit, not from the seed, which makes it a fruit oil like olive rather than a seed oil. The main selling point is heat tolerance. Refined avocado oil can handle temperatures up to roughly 520 degrees Fahrenheit, among the highest of any common cooking oil. It is rich in monounsaturated fats, similar in composition to olive oil, with a mild, buttery flavor that works well for searing steaks, roasting vegetables, and grilling. But here is the problem. In 2020, researchers at the University of California, Davis tested 22 brands of avocado oil sold in the United States and found that at least 82% of the samples were either rancid before their printed expiration date or adulterated with cheaper oils. In 3 cases, bottles labeled pure or extra virgin avocado oil turned out to contain nearly 100% soybean oil. The reason this fraud goes unchecked is that there are no official standards of identity for avocado oil in the United States. The term extra virgin on an avocado oil label has no legal meaning. It is essentially decoration. Avocado oil is the newcomer with a credibility problem, but the last oil on this list has a far bigger footprint than any of the others, and you have almost certainly eaten it today without knowing. Palm oil. The oil palm tree is native to West and Central Africa, where communities have been pressing oil from its bright orange fruit clusters for thousands of years. In the early 1900s, the tree was brought to Southeast Asia as an ornamental. Today, Indonesia and Malaysia produce roughly 85% of the world's palm oil. Palm oil shows up in close to half of all packaged products on supermarket shelves. Chocolate, margarine, instant noodles, laundry detergent, lipstick, ice cream, sliced bread, shampoo. It appears under dozens of different ingredient names, which is why so few consumers realize how much of it they use. The reason it is everywhere is straightforward. Palm oil is semi-solid at room temperature, stable at high heat, resistant to rancidity, virtually tasteless, and cheap to produce at enormous scale. But that cheapness carries a cost. Industrial palm oil plantations are a leading driver of tropical deforestation across Borneo and Sumatra, destroying habitat for orangutans, pygmy elephants, and Sumatran rhinos. Carbon-rich peatland has been drained and burned to clear space for new plantations, releasing enormous amounts of carbon into the atmosphere. The complication is that boycotting palm oil is not as simple as it sounds. Palm is by far the most land-efficient oil crop on the planet. Replacing it with soybean or sunflower oil would require roughly 6 times as much farmland to produce the same volume, potentially causing even more deforestation elsewhere. It is the oil most people never think about, and it is almost certainly the one they consume the most. Every oil tells a story. Some were born out of religious restrictions, others out of wartime shortages, and a few were discovered entirely by accident. The bottle sitting next to your stove has a history behind it. Now you know what is inside it, and more importantly, when to reach for it and when to leave it in the cupboard.